If you have a press fit bottom bracket on your bicycle, whether it's a mountain bike, road, gravel, or cyclocross bike, chances are you're going to get some creaking at some point, and in this video I'm going to show you how to resolve that. Now this is something that I typically have to do about once a year on my bikes. Your mileage may vary, it's going to depend on what kind of conditions you ride in. But for this video I'm going to show you how to tap out the bearings. We're going to clean the bottom bracket shell and put a little bit of grease and then put them back in. Now there are some fairly specialized tools that you're going to need to have for this job. First of all, you're going to need a bearing cup remover like this one. This is the Park RT1. And you're also going to need a bearing press to get the bearings back in. Like I said, these are specialized tools and the bearing press is going to be the more expensive of these. Now there is the chance that you could damage the bearings when you're removing them. I've never had that happen, but if this is a bike that you rely on within the next few days, then you're going to want to have some extra bearings on hand. Press fit bearings are not that expensive, so typically about once a year I'll tap them out, clean them, put them back in, and then in the next year I would just replace the bearings. But like I said, it's a good idea to have some bearings on hand just in case. You're not going to have to remove the rear wheel to do this, but you do want to lock out the SRAM derailleur cage if you have one. If it's a Shimano, just undo the lever at the top to take pressure off of the cage. Now we're going to remove the cranks, and it'll depend whether you have Shimano or SRAM of how they come off. For SRAM, you just take an 8mm Allen wrench and undo this bolt. I've already loosened this. I put the bike on the ground just for purposes of the video. This is 54 Newton meters, so that is really tight. So you're just going to turn this bolt until the crank comes loose. Put your hand on it. Usually you can just tap with your hand and that other side will come out. Sometimes you do have to use a soft mallet, which it looks like I'll have to do with this one. And just an FYI, there might be a spacer like that was on this one, so just make sure when you take the cranks off, you pay attention to any spacers so you can put those back on. Now we're going to tap out the bearings one at a time, and we're going to put in the bearing cup remover, and I'll do it this way. So you slide it in from the back side. Those little things will fan out, and then we just tap it out with a hammer. And you'll want to make sure you put your hand on the other side once it starts to come loose to catch the bearing. Okay, so that's one bearing, and we'll do the same thing to the other side. In between the bearings, you're going to have a plastic sleeve like this, and this is indicated L and R for left and right, so when you reinstall, just make sure you put this back in the right way. Now we're going to take a clean paper towel or clean rag and wipe out the bottom bracket shell. I just use basic rubbing alcohol, and you're going to clean out the bottom bracket shell really good. Also just kind of clean around the exterior of the bottom bracket shell. Get any dirt, grease off, and then both bearings do the same thing. Just wipe them down really good with the rubbing alcohol. While you have the bearings out, put your fingers in and just make sure the bearings are really smooth. If they feel crunchy or they kind of hesitate and stick, it is time to replace the bearings. So at this point, you would put in a new set of bearings, but these are really good. So all I need to do is clean everything up and then grease them, and we're going to put them back in. All right, so I've got everything cleaned off really good. Now I'm going to put a really thin coating of grease on the outside of the bearings. So just put a little on your fingers and just go along the outside. Get it kind of just started with your hands, and then we're going to use the bearing press to push it back in. Whenever you press bearings back in, you want to do one at a time. So as you press bearings in, you want to make sure that the bearings are going in straight. Sometimes I use these little guides. Sometimes it works best if I don't. I'm not going to use it. So I'm referring to that piece right there. This bearing has a flat surface, so I don't need to use that. Always make sure the bearing is going in straight. Before you put the other bearing in, make sure you put this plastic sleeve back in And pay attention to the L and the R. If it has a logo like this says SRAM, you probably can't see it in the video, you should be able to read it from the back side. That's just a little tip there, but there should be an L and an R. So I'm going to put that back in the middle. And then I'm going to press the other bearing in the same way. Okay, so I've already put grease on the other bearing, so with the sleeve in the middle, I'm ready to press this one back in. Now it's time to reinstall the cranks, but before we do that, you want to wipe the spindle of the crank off really good. And it's a good idea to just wipe the entire crank down with, again, a paper towel or a rag and rubbing alcohol. I'm going to put a thin coating of grease on the crank spindle and also put some grease on the inside here where the bolt goes, and just push the crank back in. And you may have to tap the other side to get it all the way through with a soft mallet. I'm going to have to do that here. Before I put the drive side crank arm back on, I want to wipe off the back side of it. Just get off any dirt that you can. Since you have it off, just take the same rag with rubbing alcohol and clean the teeth of the chain ring. And if you haven't already done so, put just a little thin coating of grease on the last part of the spindle where the drive side crank arm is going to go on. Okay, this one has a spacer on the drive side, so I'm going to put that back in. Line up the crank arm and tighten it back on. I'm not going to worry about the chain yet, I can put that on later. I'm going to snug it up with this wrench, and then I'm going to use a torque wrench. So at the beginning of the video, I did not mention a torque wrench as well, but you definitely want to use a torque wrench. This is one area of the bike that I always use a torque wrench. 54 Newton meters is tight. You don't want to over tighten it, and you definitely don't want to under tighten it, because you can have your crank come loose while you're riding. All right, that's 54. Okay, I'll put the chain back on. This is a narrow wide chain, so you want to put the chain on the wide link over the wide tooth. That's back on. Undo the cage lock, and we're done. So that's how you can hopefully resolve the creaking in your bottom bracket. If that doesn't work, then your bearings may be going bad, and you would do the exact same process except just push in new bearings. So I consider this a bit more of an advanced home mechanic type repair. If you don't feel comfortable about anything in this process, or you don't have the specialized tools to include a torque wrench, then just take your bike to the bike shop. Questions or comments that you have about this, drop those below. Thank you for watching.